Hello and welcome. I'm Kate.
And I'm Emily, and this is Beyond the Neurotype,
A podcast that explores what it's like to be human affirming, regardless of labels, considerate of every person's individual needs, and allowing us to, ideally, understand what is behind every individual's actions, choices, and needs.
We do this with curiosity and love as we explore these individual and unique experiences that are rich with challenges, growth, and grace.
I'm Kate, a mental health social worker and synergetic play therapist. I'm the co-founder of the Village Therapy Hub. I'm a mum to 2 adolescents, and I love understanding and exploring what is happening beneath the surface for children and adults, and what behaviours are communicating to us. But let me keep it real. Much like yours, my life is a roller coaster. So I also understand the complexities of being a carer, the challenges of the day-to-day, and I won't pretend it's all enjoyable.
I'm Emily, a neurodivergent mum to a beautiful autistic girl and wife to a wonderful autistic man. I'm passionate about celebrating neurodiversity and creating a community where people are seen, held, and loved for who they truly are. It is my hope that as you listen to the stories of our beautiful guests, you feel inspired, validated, and supported in your journey.
This podcast is recorded on the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. We offer our heartfelt gratitude to the traditional custodians and elders, past, present, and emerging, for continued opportunities to learn, reflect, and grow.
Well, hello and welcome back. For those of us who are, the podcast is new, but for those of us who are a bit new to the way we do things, we have a guest episode and then alternate that the following week with a reflection episode where Kate and I talk about our feelings and thoughts after the previous episode, as well as maybe share some feedback that we've had from our wonderful listeners. So hello, Kate.
I am.
So last week we had the wonderful neurodivergent educator, Charnee Gregson. And what an awesome episode that was.
Yes, so good. I loved being in it in the moment when we were recording it and then listening back to it. There were so many things that I had forgotten about because there was so much. There was so much involved in that episode, so many things to think about.
Yeah, I felt the same when I was editing it. I was like, oh, I forgot that she said that. That was really amazing. And I enjoyed going back over that. And I think I'll go back over that episode a few times actually. And so many really powerful points in there.
Yeah. I felt like when I was listening to it, I had kind of 2 hats on. And so I think I want to name that straight up before we have this conversation. Because part of me, works in the field and spends a lot of time with teachers and does a lot of advocacy in schools and sees how hard teachers work, sees how hard the job is. Actually, genuinely, I worry about teachers a lot when I'm spending time in schools because I can see how big the load is and I can see how increasingly complex classrooms have become. There was once a time when we'd kind of have a classroom and there'd be one kid in it who had some additional challenges and perhaps needed an additional adult. I was at a school yesterday talking to a teacher who has 8 children that have been flagged and funded and 2 additional adults in that classroom to support those additional kids. So that's a classroom of, 20, whatever, high 20s, isn't it now, classrooms? High 20 kids, 8 of them are identified as having significant needs and adjustments. Who knows who's in there that hasn't been identified, and 3 adults full time in that room to manage that environment. That's a massive challenge for anyone whether you're a child or an adult in that environment. So I just feel like teachers are under more and more pressure to be able to meet the needs of kids. I heard on the news this week that more and more principals are leaving their positions due to the confrontation that they face with parents. And I thought that was really interesting because parents are getting better, I think, at advocating for what their children need. So the fact that that is so challenging to principals because of the system the principals sit in, that they can't meet the parents' needs and expectations that they can clearly identify their children have. How can this possibly shift unless something actually changes? And
Yeah,
that's why
yeah,
I loved the things that Charnee talked about, because they're things that she has tried, put into practice, and does on the daily. But I guess the other
yeah.
part that I need to identify from my perspective is that I'm also a parent whose children have experienced school can't. I've had autistic burnout. I've had significant mental health come about because of school engagement and the lack of support in that environment. And so I also have a strong sense of a need for things to change while also holding that it's a really hard environment to work in. And I certainly do not think that teachers are at blame for this. I think it's a systemic problem, and teachers need our support because they're stuck in a system that isn't actually meeting anyone's needs, theirs included.
Absolutely. And I love that we address this topic from a teacher to begin with too, because yeah, definitely I don't want to come across at all when I criticize our experience with school, which has been like yours, and a lot of significant mental health that's come about from since prep, from the start of school. And yeah, just progressively, our experience with school over the years has not been a positive one, despite wonderful, amazing teachers who I think so highly of. And so I want to be really clear about that as well, that, yeah, when we criticize it, we're not criticizing the teachers. Yeah, I have so many friends who are teachers who are wonderful human beings that care so much.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I think their plates are just being overloaded. Um, and really, I think we need to identify the systemic issues and how the system's kind of failing these children and failing the teachers.
Yeah. Where to start is the challenge.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
I think that I feel like I need to start with talking about accommodations.
Mm,
And again, because this was a conversation I had just yesterday about um, that when you have so many kids in the classroom that need individual adjustments and accommodations, surely it's easier to put them in place for the entire classroom. Surely that teacher's mental load would be less if they were able to put accommodations in place for the entire classroom. See, and I can see how when I named that, that felt really overwhelming. Of course it did, because that's not the way you've been doing it for all the years previously. So, of course, something new feels really challenging. And change does often challenge us rather than inspire us. The idea of change or watching someone else do something differently is often quite challenging for us to observe. So I can see how that feels really, really difficult. But I wonder if even doing that on a micro level, in terms of there just being a few things that become adjustments for all. You don't have to go as big as Charnee did in her description. You know, she had a massive piece of paper that had all of those things named on it that were possible accommodations or accommodations that she makes every day in her classroom. But you don't need to go that big all at once. You can just start with some small things that perhaps you notice even that you're having to come down on regularly. Maybe I'll take the hat thing for an example. Perhaps you've got a number of kids that are wearing their hat in the classroom, and you are constantly saying to those kids, take your hat off, take your hat off, take your hat off. I wonder if there's a possibility of just stopping saying that and seeing what happens. You don't even have to name it as now everyone's allowed to wear their hats in the classroom, but you can choose whether it's something you're going to engage in as a constant, like if you feel like you're on rote about something, there's a good chance that that's because there's a need that's being met by that something. And perhaps instead we could get curious about how could we actually allow that to happen? And I have that conversation with parents all the time. And now I'm seeing how that conversation is really valid in the classroom space too. And my child was someone, the hat's a good one because my child was someone that was a hat wearer, as I named in the podcast episode with Charnee. And I actually talked to him about it afterwards. And I said, this woman I just talked to, she lets kids wear their hat in the classroom. And he said, I just never understood that. I just never understood how me wearing a hat affected them and why they thought it would stop me from learning. And that is why every time someone told him to take his hat off, he would arc up with a, like, what does it matter to you? Let me wear
Yeah.
my hat. It's
And
helping me.
And it's such a sensory thing. My husband, who's autistic, wears a hat to work. It's a branded hat with the company's logo on it. And every Zoom meeting when he's working from home, because he can't stand the feeling of his hair in his face. And it just provides, I guess, some sensory input. I don't know, but he always wears a hat.
Mm.
And again, it's another example of in the adult world, wearing a branded company hat to work is not considered rude or inappropriate. He's, yeah, been in the company 10 years. No one cares that he wears the branded hat to work. Like
Yeah.
it's just another, I suppose, yeah, example in the real world, this thing that this kid is getting picked up on constantly and yeah, berated for wearing this hat. And then yeah, it's just such a no big deal in the real world.
Mm. I actually lay awake last night thinking, wondering how different a human I would be if I had been exposed to accommodations as a child.
Mm.
Because I am someone that doesn't know or is significantly in the process of learning, but for a long time hasn't known what I need. I have worked really hard to show up in a situation the way I think the people in that situation expect me to show up. I will wear what I believe is the appropriate things to wear. I will speak in the way I believe is appropriate to speak about the topics I think they want to hear about. I have chameleoned myself so, so, so well that as I've gotten older, and I've talked previously about feeling like the mask has slipped and now I don't know who I am, part of that has been starting to notice my needs. But I was never, ever, ever taught to attune to those needs. And I just wonder whether offering accommodations allows for that. Having the opportunity to feel into, is this something that I want to take up? Is this not? If I have flexibility in the classroom to choose if I sit down every time, or what kind of chair I sit on, or whether I'm wearing a hat or not, or what my clothes might feel like. If I actually can feel into that, I just wonder if I wouldn't be feeling so unsure of who I am today.
I had this conversation with someone yesterday who, again, their child experiences significant school can't, and she said to me, why do you think this is? Like, were these, in our generation at school, do you think that these kids existed, but just, you know, um, what's the difference with this kind of generation? And I was like, well, I was one of them. I was 100% one of them that school was really difficult for me, and I went through a lot of school can't and school refusal, and yeah, in the last couple of years, I think my attendance was below 50%, but I had a letter from my doctor, so that's how I got to pass. Um, and um, but I learned to shut down a lot of
Mm.
my, you know, feelings, my thoughts. Yeah, and I frequently wonder the same thing, how different my life could have been had I learned to um, embrace those feelings a bit more and get curious. And yeah, what about it is yeah, just find those accommodations that work for me, which I've found over time in my adult life. But yeah, I'm really going through an unpacking process, as you do, I suppose, when you have a child that's going through this, you do start to really unpack what you went through yourself. And
Mm.
um, yeah, I also had some feedback in the last since Charnee's episode. Someone shared with me that they're concerned that if their child had access to accommodations, that they would kind of use that as an excuse to be lazy. And yeah, I wondered how if you had any kind of thoughts on.
Well, I guess as Shani talked about in her episode when we asked this question, and that's exactly why I asked the question, because I knew it would be something that would come up for people while watching, because it's a question I come across all the time as well. And
Okay.
I know that teachers face it all the time as well. And as she addressed, it's great information. If even if a child, I always wonder what is lazy. So let's kind of maybe start there. That lazy is a behavior and therefore it's information about something that child is struggling with. Perhaps, that's about motivation. Perhaps it's about seeing the benefit or the value in something. Perhaps the teaching that's being given isn't of interest to them. We actually have a podcast coming down the track that dives into talking about values and the importance of finding those to find out who you are so that you can construct your life so that you're actually motivated to participate in it. And school's a great example of that because at school, it's such a particular box. There's a particular way that things are delivered, there's an order, there's topics that have to be met. Like, and I totally get it. The Department of Education is accountable through results. So someone somewhere along the way decided that this curriculum delivered the result numbers that were needed to prove that it works. And that is how treatments and systems are designed. But if that child is experiencing or showing laziness, then I would really be curious about why. What is that actually expressing? If I'm showing that I'm lazy, if I'm showing laziness, there's a good chance that I do not want to do whatever it is that I think I should be doing, that I am so overwhelmed by whatever's in front of me that I've switched off, and that I'm so unsure about the steps to take to achieve what I need to do that I've just kind of turned back to, I'll just stop here. So again, behaviors are symptoms of something we're experiencing.
It was certainly something I was that yeah, it was thrown at me when I was a kid too, that I was kind of a bit of a lazy learner. And yeah, when I think to my times where I probably demonstrated what looked like laziness, it was like you say, that overwhelm
Mm.
and the perfectionism of, if I can't do this perfectly, I don't want to try. And so or just complete disinterest. And for some kids, boredom for me is like physically painful.
Yeah.
And if, yeah, I don't see the point. If I know what I want to do, as I always knew I wanted to do something in the medical kind of field one day when I was in high school. And it's like, I don't care about learning about soil types or rock types or, whatever. Just get me to the bit that I want to know about.
Yeah.
And so it was hard for me to, or abstract things like maths. I did that I'm not going to be an engineer. I don't need to know how to do all these complex equations.
Yeah.
Like, teach me something I need to know. Um,
Yeah. How often do we hear kids that really struggle at school say things like, why do I even need to learn that?
yeah,
Because they
yeah,
cannot connect it to
yeah.
something that matters to
Something
them. It's
that,
like, why would you possibly tell me that? I do not need to know.
and I struggled so badly with maths. But then when I went to uni and I was doing a science degree and I had to learn maths as one of my subjects, I was really nervous. But I was able to, and I did really well because I was able to connect the maths to what I was learning,
Mm.
um, and what I needed to be able to do to get to the end of my course, and why that maths mattered. So yeah, I think often what presents as, my parents certainly thought I was lazy, and that I didn't really have a work ethic, and um, yeah, but behind that was actually something quite different.
Yeah. Look, and for me, lazy became such a negative, um, that I would possibly ever be lazy was such a negative that actually now as an adult, I really struggle if I feel like I am being lazy or if I'm feeling like I need to be lazy. Like
Yeah.
if I'm so overwhelmed by something I'm trying to figure out that I am just like stuck and I just want to like sit on the couch and watch a movie. In my mind, that is like the worst thing I could possibly do. So actually rest and time to process and digest and sift through things and lazy have become really strongly connected for me and
Mm.
and carry a narrative of that's bad because it's not productive and I could be doing better and I should be and there's all the, blah, 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 get on with it, da, da, da. And that's been a real problem or a real challenge for me in my life that I'm working now to layer back. And again, brings me back to what if I had just been allowed?
Yeah.
What harm? I actually think the harm came from not being allowed. We often worry about what harm will we cause our kids if we let them, you know, do whatever they need to do, if we just let them follow their process, whatever that looks like, we worry about the outcomes. But I actually think for me, the worst outcomes came from not being able to follow any of that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been thinking a lot lately of this kind of um over, my childhood and my life, where we're taught to shut down our feelings and our needs, and just push through. And I think yeah, some uh, times where I've landed in quite scary situations, where I was physically not safe, and my default then was to ignore my feelings, my intuition, and shut that down. And and so I feel like a child with a very strong fight response has been the greatest blessing for me to unpack a lot of that. Yeah, and I'm grateful, particularly having girls. It's something, we've got to be so careful of shutting down their feelings and their intuition about things. And I feel like it's all kind of lumped together with this gradual over time, just making them ignore things, making them push through. And
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree because I know that being a chameleon has landed me in relationships with, both romantic and friendships where I have just conformed to whatever that person needs from me and become so disconnected from who I actually am that I don't exist at all in that relationship. And that's a really dangerous place to be in many ways.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So imagine
Mm,
a world where we have options of how we engage in our environment on the daily from a young age for the, what is it, 13 years that we're prescribed to this particular place that we have to go. And if in that environment we are able to connect to what do I need? How do I know? And then how can I make it happen? And the power that would come from being able to learn that above all else, that we would step out into the world knowing what works for us, knowing what feels good, knowing that we can wear a hat to work and that that will help instead of, oh no, it's totally inappropriate that I would wear a hat to work. I need to like just suck it up, which means I spend all day managing my sensory overload to meet the standard that I feel everyone else needs me to have. Just completely different experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
And watching now as the parent of a child who has finished, has gone through those years of education and come out the other end and spent their entire time bumping up against their needs versus the system's needs. So, and it wasn't even that there was a lack of accommodations. There was really, the accommodations were around what the system felt or the, what met their needs, not my child's needs. And so they spent a lot of time bumping up against that and ruptured relationships and developed a reputation very quickly, which of course, once you've been prescribed as the problem child, the smart ass, the challenge in the room, it's very hard to shake that.
Mm,
And that follows you through your time in that institution. And they've come out the other end unable to figure out who they are, what they even like, what they need, and they're so stuck.
mm,
And now they get to do, now there is an opportunity for exploring that a little more and feeling into that a little more. But at the same time, there's societal expectations around now it's time to get a job. Now it's time to get your license. Now it's time to, step out in the world as an adult. But the 13 years that they've been in education, is that even right? Is that even the number?
I think so.
I haven't worked it out. I'm just
Yeah,
saying that. I
yeah,
know where it
13
came from.
years. Yeah.
That has not prepared them at
Mm,
all for where they are right now. And I see this a lot in my work that kids leaving the system, they don't know what to do. They don't know what they need. They don't know how to meet their needs. They don't know what they're interested in. They've spent so long conforming to a system that they actually have no idea who they are. And if their chameleon skills are not as strong as mine, they're not just going to adapt until they get to 40 and then go, oh my God, who the hell am I? Like, now
yeah.
I'm having the experience that these kids that I know, young adults, are having.
Mm. I think the prescribed accommodations is a really good point too. That yeah, these are the accommodations we think your child is going to need, and so therefore this is kind of um, and my daughter who's in upper primary now very much doesn't want accommodations
Yeah.
because of she doesn't want to be othered.
Yes.
And I think that was such a really important point that Charnee talked about was, yeah, accommodating without othering. And by
Mm.
accommodating everyone, then everyone's got the option to take up this accommodation. So it's not, yeah, Johnny over here. Oh, you'll do it this way. And like what you said, Kate, in the episode, it gives the child a chance to choose to stretch themselves if they want to, yeah, try something different and lose a part of the accommodation, or yeah. Um, that was something I really took out of that.
And there are
That
so many, 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 many kids that have the exact same experience of your daughter. They don't want to stand out as different. And so in doing that, they shut it down and they attempt to have no needs
yeah,
and they pull them all inside and they hold themselves so deeply and they're absolutely a duck on the water while they're at school. And then they come home and they fall apart and their family see how much they are struggling. And then in the morning, they don't want to go to school. I had actually said this yesterday to another teacher that my information about how kids managing at school comes from the morning and the afternoon. How they are during the day at school actually doesn't tell me much at all,
yeah,
unless they're showing you behaviors and then, okay, now everyone's willing to have a conversation about it. But if parents are saying to me that their child is struggling before and after school, and school is saying, oh, they're fine when they're here, they're happy, they're hanging out with friends, they're smiling, they're engaging, it's all good. No, it's not. That's our information tells us that actually when they're at school, it's not okay.
yeah.
So then I'm going to be asking for how can we be putting things in place that this child is not asking for? And I get that that is totally crackers. Like, but they don't even want it. They're saying they don't want it. They don't need it. And so then the idea of global accommodations changes that completely because if it's just available to the classroom, then I think we would be surprised how many kids would take up the opportunities of having things that support them. Like, I bet most kids would sit on a wobble chair given the opportunity.
Mm,
And yet, I have to individually prescribe them for kids in classrooms. And, lots of things. That thing like the a backpack being close. How many children? That
mm,
blew my mind because how I'd never realized that. I'll admit that has never occurred to me. But I know so many kids that that is the case for, and I haven't been able to figure out why it is that they keep needing to go back to their bag, why it is that it's such an issue. And this kind of constant leaving the classroom, constantly needing to connect with their stuff. And what a simple fix to put that backpack on the back of their chair or on the wall behind them. So then their
mm,
precious things are safe and nearby and they can keep an eye on them. Because so many kids, and I know they bring precious things to school. I know these kids are doing that. And it's a constant battle, oh God, they brought that thing to school again. Teachers saying that's not an appropriate thing to bring to school. Parents are at home going, you really can't take that to school. Like, we're going to get in trouble for taking that to school. It becomes this whole thing. Kids like, that has to come to school with me. Kid brings it to school in whatever way they have to, because usually the parents are, by this stage, trying so hard to stop it and the child sneaks it or whatever they have
mhm.
to do. They will bring that to school by any means possible. And then that becomes a problem. And then maybe we don't even know they've got it in their bag, but they're needing to leave the room all of the time, needing to connect in. Like, just, it happens so often. And it happens with kids. Like, this is not even a neurodivergence issue. This is a trauma thing. This comes up because of lots of different experiences kids are having. So it's really incredible. I'd actually love there to be a study on the difference between like bags that are kept in the room versus bags that are kept out. Because there's a lot of schools that have both systems in place
Mm,
because they might have, some classrooms that that's not a possibility. So they keep them out in the corridor, and then other classrooms it is. So they keep them in. And I'd be really curious to track even particular kids, how they manage when that's different.
yeah. Um, and my daughter in prep had a keychain stolen off her bag, and just how traumatizing that was for her, that this special keychain that she loved was taken off her bag. And
Yeah.
talked about it for years. And so it's I understand why you don't want you I wouldn't want to leave my handbag out, of my office where I couldn't see it. Like, again, it
Yes.
is a reasonable, you know, thing to expect that, yeah, we're not going to all leave our handbags out in the corridor. like my handbag is under my desk
Yeah.
and I'll leave it in a room with certain people, but I'm not going to leave it in a corridor for everyone to walk through. So again, it's such a reasonable thing. But obviously practically, it's not always that easy. But yeah,
Hmm.
that's a practical issue, not an issue with the child.
That's right. And actually, a lot of these are, aren't they? That
Mm,
it's about how does that look and how do we make that happen in the room? And what are we dealing with from our own needs that is getting in the way of feeling like we can provide that for the child? And something I talk about a lot with the kids I work with is that I get this kind of, I can get an adult should in my head when I'm working with them. That we might be working with something and I can see that it's like really important to them, but then I get like the voice of their parent who says, I really want you to work on that thing, or I really want that thing to stop, or I really need this piece to change. Or I get like a societal expectation of that's not an okay behavior. And we come across this as parents all the time. How often do our kids act in a certain way and we go, no, I can't be raising a person that's going to be like that when they're 20. Then you're five, but I don't care that you're five because when you're 20, if you act like that, that will not be okay. And I cannot be responsible for that. So we shut it down. So
mm,
I will often name with kids, oh my gosh, I just got like an adult voice in my head that just told me that this is not okay. But actually, it's totally okay because we're just trying to figure it out and we're working through it. And I could imagine, and I'm not a teacher, so I'm only imagining, but if that happens to me as a therapist, and I've got one child in the room with me at that in that moment, and I can get so quickly drowned in the voice of their parents, their teachers, their needs, blah blah blah. Societal expectations is a big one that comes in. I can only imagine teachers in this massive classroom with all of these kids. Like they've got the voices of all of the parents, the expectations, the pressure to get outcomes. That a lot of this will be internalized stuff that just as a teacher, I'm responsible for. They got into the job because they want to help kids become great adults, become great humans. Like I really believe that. But that's a huge pressure if every day the reactions of the kids in the classrooms and their needs are being informed by, oh my gosh, you're going to be an adult that acts in this way. But I can't imagine how, as a human, without a real lot of work and insight, you couldn't not do that as a teacher. Like that, it just would be coming up. So I think it's mostly about knowing that it's coming up and identifying it as a should that's coming in as an expectation that you're then putting on to the classroom. And that maybe you can do nothing about that initially. Maybe it's just about noticing that to start with. And that's definitely when I talk to parents, what I suggest, let's just notice the amount of times we do that. But projections, and that's what that is when I'm working with a 5-year-old and I'm going, oh my gosh, you can't do this when you're 20. Projections will undo us every time. They will cause us to respond with that 5-year-old in a way that is not meeting that 5-year-old's needs at all. It is about shutting down them as a 20-year-old. And who they are at 5 is not who they will be at 20. They are on a journey. They are not stopped and stuck. I'm not who I was at 20, and I'm definitely not who I was at 5. They are not either, you know?
yeah. Oh, I've been so guilty of that, when my daughters um lashed out and hit me. I'm like, you'll go to jail for that when you're older if you do. You can't hit people.
Yeah, we've all
Yeah.
done it. If we're a parent, or we've spent time around children, because even if we're not a parent, if we have been around children, we've had that thought. I guarantee you've had that thought when you've seen a kid, acting in a particular way, you have looked at them and gone, "Oh my God, I don't want to know them later on in life. They're a hooligan. Yes, they're gonna end up in jail. They're gonna end up in this way. They're gonna do this. My kid's bossy. They're never going to make friends. No one's going to want to be my child's friend because they're controlling everything. No one's ever going to, we do these things all the time. And these are things I hear all the time from parents. And I totally get it. We have so much pressure on us as parents and as educators to get it right, like there is a right, because I mean, what if we mess it up and the kids do go off the tracks later in life? Whose fault will that be? Like, where will we lay blame? Because blame really helps us to feel grounded in managing challenges. But perhaps that's not where the focus needs to be, you know? I think
Mm,
blame's a fairly unhelpful coping mechanism, but it's one we go to and we don't want any part of it. If we can see that there's a blame brewing, we don't want any part of it. We want to do everything we can to make sure that our hands are clean.
yeah.
And we don't want to lean into that mess. We don't want to sit in the shit. We talked about this before. We might talk about this every time. We don't want to sit in the shit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, it it's a big discussion and it feels big.
Yeah. And I think yes, it feels really big. So I don't want people to feel like, oh, this is impossible. This is
Mm,
so big that this is impossible. What I want to invite is curiosity and observation about what's happening right now and how does that actually feel? And no judgment on that. You're doing it the way you're doing it, whether you're a parent or an educator listening to this or somewhere in between. You are doing it because you're doing it. You're doing it that way because something about that way works. Whether it's the familiarity that works, whether it's actually working in some way, whether it helps you feel better, it's all okay. Like we're all just doing what we're doing because it's what we know. And the first shift in that comes through curiosity, through just noticing, but doing that really gently. No judgment. There's nothing bad that any of us are doing. We're all just humans figuring it out. So let's just be curious, notice, and that might and often does lead to, well, I wonder if I just shifted that thing, or I wonder if I just tried that a little bit differently, and allows us to just be more human in our experiences. And really, when Shani talks about naming her brain and the fact that she puts things down and loses them and talking about that with the kids, like, yes, that's incredibly powerful because she is neurodivergent and that's a wonderful neurodivergent piece. But it's great to do that conversation no matter who you are, because
mm,
our brains are all incredible, fascinating, changing, adapting machines. And allowing an opportunity to be curious about that is incredible. Just to be able to name, right now, my brain feels whatever, you know? Imagine showing up to places and being able to say, oh, my brain's really full today. I'm not really sure what's going to happen here.
yeah,
I'm really struggling to focus because I've got all these things that are going on for me, or whatever it is, that it's all just pieces and stages and adaptions, and we can just notice it and love it. Let's try loving it. Like imagine if we just loved all the bits that showed up.
yeah, yeah. And that's again something I'm not experiencing until now. It's kind of, you I suppose as a child when you're overcoming you're forcing yourself through things. You're not embracing that part of your brain that does, send you off on tangents or um yeah, and now as someone in their 30s is now going through this process of really unpacking it all and learning to love the whole part of me and that none of it's broken, that I'm not some, defunct thing off the manufacturing line, that I'm actually, yeah, perfect as I am, and we're all perfect as we are, and we're
Mm.
meant to be the way we are, and let's work with that.
Yeah. And that not everything is for us, not everyone is for us, but through stepping into our authenticity, we get to find what is for us, what does feel more aligned, instead of constantly feeling like we're, pushing shit up a hill because nothing seems to be working.
Yeah. I think, yeah, and going back again, it's not definitely not a criticism of teachers. I feel like the education system as a whole needs to adapt to find a way to embrace individuality while also, you know, um, processing,
Yeah.
thousands of children. Like it really feels like they're kind of being processed through rather than um, embraced. And it's, yeah, it's such a huge problem. The reality is all of these children who do not fit that mold or are unable to mask adequately to go through that experience are essentially denied an education.
Mm.
The stress that puts on parents, for myself, with I have to go to work, I can't work from home, I have to be at work, and the stress that puts on me when my daughter can't attend school
Mm.
is enormous. I've got a friend who is very qualified uh, in a profession where she needs to attend work to maintain her license. And now she's not been able to attend work so that she can homeschool her autistic child, who had a horrific experience in their first year of school. With being denied accommodations and forced into awful situations. And this parent now would have to go through their grad year all over again and start from scratch if they were to return to the workforce. And, the reality is that a lot of the parents doing this are women too. And so, what are we doing to women and their capacity to earn, which then puts them in a, really difficult, sometimes dangerous position that they can't even go out and, you know, um, yeah, it really infuriates me that this the system hasn't adapted and something desperately needs to be done because, my child is now grade 5, so this is our 6th year. And we started the year with, we attended one day and then had a week of non-attendance. And so something is, you know, it's not safe for these children to
Mm.
attend school. It is not safe for me to go. So yeah, it feels really dire for me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I'll tell, and I'll say that I don't share any of these stories about my kids. My kids are older, so I don't share any of these stories without having spoken to them. They're very aware of this podcast and we have lots of conversations. So everything that I share is with permission. But my daughter got through primary school completely unnoticed. She was seen as this child who was so incredibly helpful. If there was a child struggling in that classroom, and we moved to the school, to a second school, um, grade 1 for her. And she very quickly found, end of grade 1, start of grade 2, and she very quickly found a child in that classroom that was really, really struggling with the classroom. And that child would spend a lot of time like under the tables, unable to, trying to create their own safe environment. I would suggest that at this stage there wasn't a lot of accommodations made. There was definitely a support teacher, a second supportive adult in that room for this child. But my daughter was much better at connecting with this child than any support worker was. And she would get under the table with the child and would really meet her needs, and they would be able to be under there, and everyone was safe and it was all okay. And this other child would come to school because my daughter was going to be there under the table with her. And I, would say at times, you're not employing my child to be her support worker. Like, where's the adult that's doing this? And they would attempt to move my daughter out after I would make those comments, and she would always go back. And everyone just decided that she was this beautiful, beautiful human. And she is. She's absolutely a beautiful human. But also, it was meeting her needs. She needed to be under the table. That child was getting the accommodations and needs that she needed as well. And by buddying up and becoming her support worker, essentially, she got to go out on the breaks with her, and she got to sit under the table with her, and she got to work on the floor, and all of the things that actually my child really, really needed. But I mean, she learnt from the best. She masked her butt off. And we started to get a sense that there were some learning challenges. But again, because she could do all the things that everyone needed her to do and participate in things and look like she was engaged, no one ever really noticed. And it wasn't until secondary school that very quickly the wheels fell off because, well, lo and behold, the child she'd been supporting didn't go to secondary school because we'd had COVID, and that had really thrown things up in the air. For a lot of these kids that were already really struggling to go to school, COVID took school off, like off the agenda. A lot of kids have never gone back to school since COVID. It's a very real
Mm.
thing. So she stepped into secondary school. There was no one there that needed her support. Suddenly, she was in the mix socially, having to manage the social dynamics that she'd kind of fudged her way through in primary school. All of the teachers that different relationships, all the various things that happened in secondary school. And very, very, very quickly, the wheels started falling off. And she tried to mask, she worked so hard to try and conform and to try and do the things and not tell anyone she was struggling. And all of that was so detrimental that very quickly we slipped into an autistic burnout, which has then proceeded into much more dangerous mental health issues. So I don't remember why I started telling this story, but what I'm trying to say is if we just offer accommodations and allow children to get a sense of it being okay that they need these things. If during her primary school years, my daughter had have experienced a culture of that kid wasn't the weird kid for being under the table. That kid was doing what they needed to do to escape the clutter of the classroom and to get a break from the noise and to find their own cocoon. If there had have been cocoons available, if there had have been an emphasis on it's completely okay for your brain to get really busy and noisy and for you to need to step outside, instead of that being like a thing that was frowned upon and shameful, then she would have stepped into secondary school having some more idea about what she actually needed. And it wouldn't have been perfect. It was never going to be a perfect system for her. And I don't have it's sliding doors, isn't it? Like I don't know what the outcome would have been otherwise, but I do know that perhaps there would have been less shame around having needs that seemed different from everybody else because everyone else wasn't given an opportunity to show that they actually have those needs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. 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 And I think yeah, these, prime our mental health issues with school started in prep, really severe
Yeah.
mental health. And the kids' lives are at stake here. Like it's not an exaggeration.
No.
Kids' lives are at stake, and I know that you know that too. And yeah, um,
And it's
yeah,
happening more and more that it's younger kids.
mm,
We are seeing in schools at the moment that the most challenging cohort are the grade prep ones and twos. And those
wow,
grade twos were really tricky grade preps, and they are just still coming. And at the moment, we have an unprecedented amount of referrals for kids in kinder, 3 and 4 year olds and kinder kids. coming through into our business. And we've never seen the number of referrals for kids that young before. So younger and younger, our kids are showing us that they are struggling.
Mm.
And it is our responsibility to notice that. If we are going to have these really complex grade 1 and 2 classrooms, and I know a lot of schools are struggling with their grade, they often have 1-2 composites, and those are really tricky classrooms at the moment, then surely instead of just doing the jigsaw of if I place the right people in the right classrooms, then surely that'll work. Maybe we need to look at a bigger picture here. And we're going to lose teachers. We're going to lose great teachers, and we're going to lose, principals. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, principal that was in the news this week. The fallout is real. We're already struggling to get enough staff. I have a friend that works in a rural town, and they cannot get enough teachers for their classrooms. And I didn't even know it was a thing, but apparently you can get permission from the Department of Education to employ someone that is not a qualified teacher, but might be studying to be a teacher or might be an education support worker, if you can prove that you can't get enough teachers, if you can't get teachers to work in your school. And so this school that my friend works at has 8 of those at this year.
Oh my God.
So we are getting to a crisis point where towns cannot sustain the number of teachers that they need.
They're employing 8 non-teachers.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they advertised and did not get a single applicant for a teacher. And this is a brilliant school that is doing amazing things, but they are in a remote area that doesn't attract people. It's not a tree change area. It's not on the train line. It's not, it's not handy to commute to a big town. It's not any of those things, but it's in Victoria. So we're not talking like the states that we might think of as problems for this, like the Northern Territory or Western Australia and those kinds of places. I bet it's happening there if it's happening in Victoria. So, this is a problem. We've got to look after our teachers.
Yeah.
And by looking after our teachers, we will look after the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like now's a good time to say that if you as a teacher or a school is wanting support in how to put in place global accommodations, Charnee does this work. We'll put her links in the comments below. And
also just get in touch with us, because depending on where you are, we know a range of people that offer this work. We have a number of contacts. Obviously, Charnee, you've heard talk, and she's fabulous, and we would love for you to access her. But if that doesn't work for whatever reason, don't feel like that's not possible. We know other options as well. So please get in touch and ask. Let's just start the conversation. Let's just start a conversation about, does this system still work? Curiosity about potentially it needing to change. And that's where change happens. We start with conversation and curiosity and observation. And I think that's a good place to end.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. It was a great chat.
Excellent chat. Thank you. And absolutely, as always, reach out in the comments, our Facebook and Instagram pages, as well as, the YouTube, Spotify comments, and our email address, beyondtheneurotype@gmail.com. And we are looking forward to next week follows similar themes around that we've talked about today, about shutting down feelings and becoming a chameleon. So really excited for next week's episode, which will be released Wednesday, 5:00.
See you then.
See you then. Thank you. For more information on today's conversation and guest, head to the links provided in the description. Please like and subscribe to keep up to date with more content, and it helps us out with the algorithm too. Beyond the Neurotype is not a licensed medical or mental health service, and any information or advice given is general in nature. Please seek professional help if anything mentioned in today's episode has raised questions or concerns.